Alright, so a new 5e adventure has dropped, Call of the Netherdeep, and now you're wondering, should you buy it, should you run it? And that's what I'm here for. I'll give you my thoughts on Call of the Netherdeep and try to answer that question, is it worth your investment? Now, Call of the Netherdeep is a collaboration between the people behind Critical Role, a show you probably know if you have been watching along with the 5e community for a while, and of course, Wizards of the Coast on the other hand. That means it's not a typical 5e adventure. It doesn't take place in the Forgotten Realms, which is sort of 5e's standard setting. It instead takes place in Matt Mercer's own world, which you will of course know from Critical Role if you've been watching that show. Overall, the adventure story seems really solid. It has some nice beats. It's a heroic fantasy tale, which is something that I always love. I like it when things are a bit epic, you're saving the world or stopping some great evil, but it also has a new twist, some new dynamics that makes it really compelling and interesting, where the characters are going up against rival adventurers as they're completing this quest, and where there's not really a villain of sorts in the game. There are of course some evil creatures and stuff like that in the adventure, but the characters will actually be facing off with a more complex character, let's say that, to avoid spoilers, in the end. So they have a lot of different ways the adventure can end based on how they handle this situation with the key character in the campaign, and then I've not said too much. The adventure also starts off in a carnival sort of setting where the characters will be playing games and meeting NPCs that they may meet again later. And I think this is a really fun way to set up an adventure, something we saw in The Wild Beyond the Witchlight as well, where we get a sort of soft start to the adventure with the characters just meeting each other, making some rolls, having some fun before they're thrown into the actual adventure itself. There are also these rival adventures in the campaign which the characters will be having run-ins with, and that's something that can of course make it a bit difficult for the DM because you have to control these characters and you have to interact with the player characters using these NPCs, and you have to decide what they're doing, how they're doing it, and stuff like that. That said, I really love when 5e adventures dare to do something different and try out new stuff, and having a rival party of adventurers is something that can really get the characters and their players invested in the adventure and get them motivated about completing the adventure, if not for the adventure itself, then for beating these annoying rivals that are sort of thwarting them at every step of the journey. Structure-wise, the adventure does a really good job, I think, initially at setting up the adventure, explaining what it's about and giving you sort of this flow chart, how the adventure is supposed to run. And we also get some advice for running each chapter, which I think is a really nice touch and not something that 5e adventures have always been great at doing. Since Call of the Netherdeep have only been out for a few days, I obviously haven't had time to run it myself. But looking at the story and structure, I would say that the adventure looks really great and I like this setting. It's of course different from the Forgotten Realms, but it does a lot of new stuff. There's new ways races interact with each other, new regions, new characters, new ways people think, new religions, all that sort of stuff. And while that may be daunting if you're used to the Forgotten Realms and you're comfortable here, getting out of your comfort zone and trying out some new flavors is a really great way to gain new fun experience playing D&D. So that's something that I appreciate and something that I actually see as a plus, because at this point we've had a lot of adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Another thing I try to judge when I'm debating whether or not I should buy an adventure is if there's a lot of content in there that I could use even if I'm not running the adventure. That would of course mean the magic items, monsters, NPCs and stuff like that. Stuff I can take out of the adventure and plug into my own game. So the question is, does Call of Netherdeep have enough in there to warrant buying it even if you are not going to run it or you're not sure that you're going to run it? We of course do get some magic items and some monsters. I wouldn't say that we get a whole lot. There is a nice collection of them, but not something where you stand back and say, wow, there's a lot in here. As for the magic items, I think there are a lot of fun ones. They explore some of concepts we've seen before with magic items that evolve with the characters, and they also get into sort of corrupted magic items without again saying too much, which I think is also something that is very fun and something that I would want to use in my own game. As for the selection of monsters, I'm a bit disappointed because while we do get a quite nice selection of monsters, there are only a handful of them that really seem compelling and have new interesting abilities that will tactically challenge the players. Most of the monsters in the book seem to be these bland stat blocks that harken back to the early days of 5e, where a monster would just have hit points, AC and 2 attacks maybe, and that's about it. And that just feels so bland this far into 5e. I want new monsters with new abilities that does new stuff so I can surprise my players. That's something we've been very focused on in our new book, Milando's Guide to Magical Marvels, live on Kickstarter, link in the description, where we try to give each monster dynamic abilities, vulnerabilities, stuff like that to make them actually interesting. I'm a bit disappointed that the book doesn't do that for all of the new monsters, because why create a new monster if it's just gonna be hit points and attacks? We already have a bunch of those kind of stat blocks. We don't really need more just because you put a fanciful name on it. So to wrap everything up, should you buy Call of the Netherdeep? Should you run Call of the Netherdeep? Is it worth your investment of money and time? As for buying it without running it, I would lean towards no, because there's just not enough new interesting monsters and magic items in there to really warrant that quite big price tag that the book has. Now, I will say, if you're planning on running another adventure of your own making in the same setting, you can take a lot from the book and use instead. Now, on the other hand, if you are considering running the adventure, you think that the setting looks cool, you like Critical Role, or your players like Critical Role, and you want to try new things in 5e, I would heartily recommend buying Call of Netherdeep. From what I've seen so far, it seems like a really fun and great adventure, and something that you would have a lot of fun with. It's something that I'm considering running myself, even though we already have a few campaigns running, because it sort of speaks to me with heroic fantasy, some complex scenarios, different endings based on how the characters behave themselves, the rival party dynamic. There is a lot of cool stuff in there that I'm eager to try out, and thus I am considering running it. If you think I should, and maybe even make some guides, though we can't publish them on the DM's Guild where I usually publish DM's guides, we can make videos for the adventure, so that would perhaps be something I would be interested in. If you'd like that, you can let me know in the comments down below, and also, of course, subscribe to the channel to get more of that kind of stuff. Now, I will say as a disclaimer that the adventure doesn't seem to be very beginner friendly, so if you are a completely new DM, I would probably recommend going with another adventure first. There are a lot of fun starter adventures that you can try out, because the whole rival party dynamic, complex emotional NPCs, stuff like that, can be really difficult for a beginner DM, so a heads up there. Now, before you go, I'd love for you to check out our new Kickstarter, Milando's Guide to Magical Marvels. We are halfway through the campaign and it's already more than 800% funded. It's a fun book filled with new adventures, magical concepts, magic items, monsters, traps, puzzles. There is a lot of goodies in there, and I would love for you to check it out. I'll leave a link down in the description so you can head over to Kickstarter and hopefully make a pledge for Milando's Guide to Magical Marvels. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.